So by the next day, William Parsons Cook is starting to feel a little better. And Palmer says, why don't we go back to where I live in Rugeley, and you can stay close by me so that I can keep an eye on you, because you're obviously not 100% well. So though William Palmer has got a house, he actually rents or get the John Parsons Cook actually has a room at the Talbot Inn, which is almost opposite William Palmer's house. And the picture there, that's a modern picture, but this is a sort of more maybe of the period time of how the Talbot Inn was looking during the time of John Parsons Cook. So he goes into the Talbot Inn, and he's, as I say, he's been feeling a bit better, but he starts to feel very ill again. But the kind friend that William Palmer is, he visits him early in the morning and orders him some coffee. And unfortunately, Cook starts being quite sick and constantly ill. And Palmer kindly goes in and out all through the day, offering his friend nourishment, and also he's seen giving him a few pills. But they don't seem to be having any kind of positive effect on poor John Parsons Cook, because he seems to be getting steadily worse and worse. Now, William Palmer feels very concerned about his poor friend being ill, and he asks one of his friends, another doctor, who's been a friend for him very long, called Dr. Jones, if he would like to come and help him look after John Parsons Cook. And this is part of the letter that was written to his doctor friend, asking him to come and saying that, you know, he's very concerned about Mr. Cook. So they come and he starts to look after him. However, it soon starts, within a couple of days, Cook is immediately starting to go downhill. Dr. Jones notices that Dr. Palmer has been giving John Parsons Cook more and more of the tablets. And in fact, John Parsons Cook is saying, no, I don't want the tablets. Every time I have the tablets, they seem to make me worse. So I don't want them. But he's too weak to sort of fend them off. And William Palmer sort of said, come on now, you know you're going to be feeling a lot better. You know you'll feel better if you have them. But unfortunately, he carries on. And as soon as he has the second lot of pills, he starts screaming and throwing himself up, and he actually starts having strong convulsions. And it seems like he's in the papers, it said that the convulsions are so strong, he's bent like a bow and cannot be straightened again. Now, Dr. Palmer is saying, I think he's having some kind of typhus fit. But the other doctor says, well, I've never seen I've never seen a typhus fit this bad before. John Parsons Cook is now saying, I can't breathe, help me, I'm please turn me onto my right side. But this seems to be the dying actions of a man. They turn him over, his heart stops, and he dies. And as the doctors, they're totally shocked, and they think, goodness me, he has died. What a terrible, terrible way to die. Absolutely awful. Now, obviously, when something happens like that, there has to be some kind of inquest and post-mortem. And in that period of time, they would hold an inquest or post-mortem, or rather the post-mortem would be held in an area where any great and good gentleman of the area would be able to come and see what was going on. And sure enough, the body of John Parsons Cook was taken to have a post-mortem held on it at a local pub. So we've now got John Parsons Cook, who we have now found out, he is admitted to one of his friends that he went to London and collected a betting book for John Parsons Cook. And he said, I'll look after it now he's dead until someone comes. I'll keep hold of the betting book. And if anybody gives me any money, I'll make sure it's kept nice and safe for people. And they're like, oh, that's really kind of you. So they decide to get somebody to come and do the post-mortem. And it's very interesting because John Parsons Cook would have expected to have a post-mortem done by someone quite senior, particularly after the sort of strange, terrible way of his death. But Dr. Palmer has a friend called Dr. Harland, who basically says, I've got 2 people who can do this post-mortem for you, and they'll be absolutely fine. And the 2 gentlemen that were going to do the post-mortem were a Dr. Charles Devonshire and a Dr. Charles Newton. Now, Devonshire was a young, inexperienced medical student who'd done very few autopsies, and Newton was basically just an assistant to a chemist, and this was his very first post-mortem. And Dr. Palmer, realising that Dr. Newton, or Mr. Newton, was very nervous on his very first post-mortem, gave him several brandies to calm his nerves. So you've now got the inexperienced Charles Devonshire shaking over the body of John Parsons Cook, and the Mr. Newton, who is, let's say, slightly the worst of wear, standing next to him to assist with the autopsy. So the first thing Mr. Charles Devonshire does is open up the body of John Parsons Cook to take out some of the stomach contents and the liquid. As he's doing that, Dr. Palmer accidentally, he says, bumps into Charles Newton, who bumps into Charles Devonshire and spills most of the stomach contents over the surface of the table and onto the floor. And they're only able to get a few tiny amounts of stomach contents. So they're a bit disappointed, and Dr. Palmer is going, oh, I'm so sorry, Guy. Really sorry, gentlemen. I don't know how that happened. I do apologise. So they then move on to the viscera, and they decide that they're going to take out some of the stomach organs that they're going to put into a contents into the jar. So they have a jar, and basically it's a little jar, and they put almost like a bladder over it. So some kind of like plastic film we would have now, but they obviously haven't got that. So they use like a bladder, and they put it over to the side of the table, and they continue doing the autopsy. And Charles Devonshire looks over and says, Where's the jars? And Newton's like, oh, I don't know. Palmer says, don't worry, I moved them out of the way to keep them safe for you. Don't worry, they're over here. And he brings them back over. And though there is still a liquid and stuff in the jar, it's noted that both of the bladders have been cut open. I said, I don't know how that happened, gentlemen. It's a terrible thing. I put them there for safety, and some idiots cut them open, but they'll still be okay. So now we've got all of the contents that we need, and they decide that they are going to send these things, obviously, to be tested by a famous Dr. Taylor, who is an authority on poisons, to check there are no poisons in the system. So all of the viscera and the liquids that have been obtained from the body of John Parsons Cook are taken outside to the postboy, James Myatt. And James Myatt puts the contents onto the cart where he's going to take them to the railway station. And apparently Palmer comes up to him and says, how much do you think you would need if you were to upset the cart? And James Myatt, sort of ignores that and drives off. Now we have a picture of Mr. Myatt, who's then actually in a trial later on. So the contents have been sent, but Dr. Taylor is so disappointed by the lack of amounts of stuff that's come, and he can't actually work out what's gone on, that he asks for a second post-mortem, and some more stuff from poor body of Cook is sent to him. Now, Samuel Cheshire is the friend who was at Shrewsbury Races, and he's also the postmaster of Rugeley. And Palmer got his friend Samuel Cheshire to intercept the post from Dr. Taylor when it came, so that it could be checked. And when it did come, they opened it up, and Dr. Taylor says, actually, I can't find any poisons. I can't find strychnine. I can't find anything that proves it. So Dr. Palmer is very happy, and he sends on the letter that he shouldn't have opened in the first place. He sends it on to the coroner. But he also decides to send a little note to the coroner saying, and a basket of food, and says, oh, you know, I hear you may have got back the autopsy report. Hope it's good news and, you know, nothing terrible was found. I know I've got the betting book and I've heard a few people talking about me having the betting book, but it's nothing to do with anything. I wouldn't worry about it. I'm sure he died of natural causes. And here you are, here's £10. Which was maybe a little tactless of William Palmer, because what that did was basically the coroner pricked up his ears and thought, my goodness me, this is very, very odd. So at Rugeley Borough Court, the information's being sort of looked at, and all of these people are starting coming forward and saying, did you know about this thing about him opening the letter? Did you know about him trying to upset the cart? Did you know about all his children dying? And we think there ought to be some kind of exclamation of some of the bodies. And they decided, in fact, to exhume Anne and Walter, because they were the sort of nearest deaths, to see if there was anything found in the bodies. And people were starting to get very suspicious. So suspicious was Dr. Taylor, the eminent authority on poisons, that he actually came down to Rugeley and made more comments than the coroner, and sort of he took over and he says, I know that I didn't find any strychnine poison, but basically this bloke died of strychnine poison, and I think that John Parsons Cook poisoned him. And such was his sort of strength of character, it was decided that indeed William Palmer was in fact guilty in this and ought to go to trial, because he had potentially murdered John Parsons Cook. Now, because of the furore over this murder or potential murder, and because of the many other bodies that had piled up with William Palmer's family and friends, because there had been other people who seemed to mysteriously die around William Palmer, it was decided that they would in fact hold the trial at the Old Bailey, the criminal court there. And these are some some drawings taken from newspapers at the time, which show the scenes outside the court, and in fact also show William Palmer on trial, standing at the dock, waiting to be found out. Well, interestingly, even though there was no sign of poison from William Parsons Cook, such was the other evidence, it was decided that the circumstantial evidence of he's trying to bribe and the other deaths, that he couldn't possibly be that he hadn't killed him. So this was the first person who is actually found guilty of strychnine poisoning, and he was then going to be sentenced to death. So just like we had earlier with William Beards, William Palmer was taken to Stafford, where he was going to be hung. And in this case, he was hung by George Smith, who was from Dudley, and he was sometimes known as the Dudley Higgler. And he was going to be the gentleman who was going to be involved with hanging Mr. Parsons, I do apologise, Mr. Palmer. And apparently, according to stories, William Palmer, as he got onto the scaffold, stood on the section and put his foot gently onto it, and he said, are you sure that it is safe? Because he didn't want it to collapse before he was hung. And Mr. Smith assured him that it would be safe right up until the moment it needed not to be. And sure enough, William Palmer was then hung. Now, because of the story and because of the amount of information, there's then been quite a lot of information. William Palmer became almost, it's, that sort of gothic sort of stuff that people are interested in. There were poems written about him, bits of his house were made into pottery. William Palmer himself, in fact, apparently there were William Palmer, and there were other bits of like John Parsons' cook and the Talbot itself, and obviously William Palmer's death mask itself, and we have a drawing there. So he went down in infamy. Now, I was told that it wasn't true, but I was actually told when I did this talk last time that the people of Rugeley wanted to change the name because it was so associated with William Palmer, but I understand that that is actually just an urban myth, and there is actually no foundation of it, but it was quite interesting. But I found no actual evidence of that. So we couldn't really go and talk about Staffordshire without talking about some terrible incidents that happen to do with the work areas and the sort of environment that people would have lived in during that time. So we've looked at some of the deaths, but obviously I found it, to be honest, when I was writing my book, I think every day I could have written about someone being killed in a mining accident, with roofs falling, being dragged, with being like something falling on them, the sides collapsing, water coming in from nearby rivers when they breached it. But obviously, you know, that would have been literally every day, I think, of the year this would have happened. But obviously, I thought we'd go on something that was perhaps a far more well-known sort of incident, the mini pit colliery disaster of 1918. So we're coming towards the end of the First World War now, and obviously people have been losing many men and young boys because of the war, and unfortunately there was going to be further disaster here. Now, mini pit was in Halmer End, near Hanley in the Stoke-on-Trent area. Mini pit is actually, you can see marked on a sort of modern map here. And it had actually been opened in 1883, and it was named after the mine owner's daughter. Now, in terms of it being a good pit, it was an excellent pit. It had a rich seam of coal, and in fact, the whole sort of area around there had a fantastic seam of coal. But in many other ways, it wasn't seen as a particularly lucky pit. So in sort of about 10 years after it was opened, there'd been a mine explosion, and all of the pit ponies down in the mine had been killed, but there were no miners down there at the time. But then in 1915, on a Sunday, there'd been another pit explosion, and it had killed 9 miners that had been down there. And they were really saying that it was unlucky because it seemed to have, in comparison with a lot of the other mines around there, they had an awful lot of what they called fire damp, which is a kind of, if you like, a mixture of gases which were known to be extremely toxic and also extremely prone to sudden explosions. And unfortunately, the area around Mini Pit was well known for having these kind of areas of fire damp and had to be treated really, really carefully. So the 12th of January 1918, the morning, the women folk are actually preparing for an old folks party at the Primitive Methodist Chapel up near the mine. And about 250 miners descend that morning to start doing their shift at the pit. Within a few hours, though, the mine gentleman, the mine colliery manager, Joseph Smith, notices that there is a sort of a plume of it's almost like dust coming out from the tall turrets that you can see there. And they also noticed that the winding machine stopped and then continued on. And he's really concerned about that. That is something that it really says to them, something's gone on underneath the ground. So they don't hear anything, but very quickly they're aware that something's going on. So he noticed smoke, dust and soot pouring out of a shaft and the fan chimney. So he asks his under manager if they've actually got like a phone call system. They have got like a simplified telephone system, and they start calling down, and some of the calls are being answered, and they say, yes, something's gone on, and others are not being. So the under manager, Mr. Weaver, very bravely goes down the shaft to investigate. And when he gets down to the shaft, he notices a scene of utter confusion. The stuff is covered in thick black dust, and he's finding it difficult to breathe, and his eyes are smarting. So there's no sign. There's miners sort of rushing past, trying to get out, and they're talking about where they've seen something collapse. And as he goes deeper in, the air is obviously getting more and more noxious, and they've then come across a body of someone that's been killed by the sort of collapse. And they quickly realise that obviously something's gone on that's really quite serious. So they rush down. They have like their own, if you like, rescue team, and rescue team go down, and they quickly realise that sections of the mine have collapsed, and the ventilation doors, which allow the air to move, have been broken. Now, the ventilation doors are extremely important in places like Mini Pit. Because of the fire damp, the only way they can try and stop the air becoming more and more dangerous in terms of the noxious fumes and explosion is by keeping the air moving at a steady pace. But as you can imagine, as the air goes through the mine and through these ventilating doors, it gets warmer, and it gets as it gets warmer, it rises up. So it actually becomes less and less efficient. So if the doors are any way damaged, it means the airflow is slowing down, and that means that the fire damp and the gases will start accumulating in the pockets where the air isn't going to be able to get down to it. And they're really, really concerned about this, because it means that several parts of the mine are now going to have no fresh air actually going down. So they realise they're going to have to send someone down that's going to know a little bit more about actually getting down there in terms of saving with oxygen and sort of equipment like that. So you can see here there's some pictures. These are pictures actually from the rescue team of the time. These are taken during the rescue team, and you can see the very, very, very simplified amount of equipment they've got. You can see that really any kind of thing landing on them, any sudden explosion, any sort of gas, they would be in trouble. They've got these very simple air pocket things at the front. You can see it come over the front, and basically they would put the little sort of, if you look, you can see like a little loop near their mouths. They would put that in their mouths, and they would have like a nose clip over their noses to stop breathing in through their nose, so they would only breathe in through their mouths. But the rescue pit, they quickly go down, and they're sort of saying that they can see, in fact, one of the captain of the rescue team says it's ripped the guts out of the Banbury and Bilhurst seams, and he's very pessimistic of finding any survivors. So they start going into the mine, and they're finding bodies now of people that have been injured by the fall, but also people who have obviously been overcome by the gases. They are finding some people who have crawled further enough away that have been affected by the gases, but are not yet poisoned enough to die, and they're able to start dragging those out. But as they get further into the pit head, they find a 16-year-old boy who has died of poisoning, and this is now 1:30 in the afternoon. So a few men have been made. So as we sort of going out, a few men have started actually making it out. There is actually a story of 47 men saved by a gentleman called Charles Greatbatch, who realises what's happened, and instead of going in the direction where he thinks the explosions happened, takes them down a seam with an exit that he knows of because he's worked there for several years, realises that he needs to jam the doors to keep the air from being poisoned, jams the door and leads 47 of them out through that one particular area. But for the rest of the men, most of the others are now trapped. And we can see here pictures from the newspapers at the time, the people waiting outside the mini pit to hear news of their loved ones, their fathers, their sons, their brothers, to see if anybody has actually survived. And obviously we've got here a picture of the Salvation Army, lassies they're called, going round to look, just to help the people as they're concerned about the loss of their loved ones. So they now think that up to 75 women are going to be bereft of their husband and 200 kiddies rendered fatherless, because now they're missing up to 155 men, and there's pretty much no chance now of anyone escaping. Thomas Brockley, however, brings a few men up. He's actually 5 of his comrades they find. So when they thought I was going to say it should be 160, but it's now down to 155. He basically brought them round, realised they were going to be gassed and saved them. But there is more to be done, unfortunately, than just the men in the mini pit. There is a gentleman called Hugh Dunbar. And Hugh Dunbar is one of the rescuers, and he's actually the chief rescuer. He's like the leader of the rescue team. And they decide to go further down into the mine to see if they can find any survivors, or at least start collecting the bodies of the missing miners. They're not expecting now, to be fair, to be finding anybody alive, but obviously now it's a mission of collecting bodies and finding where and if they can get where the sort of areas are that are collapsed, if you like. So they're going down one particular area, and they realise, because their safety lamp's flickering, that the air is getting very bad, and they put on their breathing apparatus, and almost straight away Hugh Dunbar says, "I can't breathe, my apparatus," he shouts, and starts flailing about, knocking off several other men of their nose clips, and in fact knocking one gentleman over. And despite their best efforts, they cannot calm him down, and he basically suffocates in the mine, and they have to drag him out, and he actually dies. So he's then another victim of the mine. This is now sort of the end of the first day, and it's decided that unfortunately they're really not going to find anybody else alive. They make several trips down over the following days to start collecting the bodies that they can. But in February, it's decided, because of the lack of ventilation, the fire damp is collecting so badly that it's now dangerous for anyone to be going down there even for a short period of time. And my understanding, and I don't know lots about mining, so apologies if I don't get this quite right. My understanding is there's something where there are sections of mine which have been mined out, and it creates gaps. And in those gaps, air collects, and the gaps are called gob. And in there, the air collects together, and it's called gob stink. Now, gob stink is extremely dangerous because it can cause explosions as well as creating the sort of the noxious fumes. And they're so worried about the fact the air's not flowing and the amount of gob stink, they decide to block it up until they know that they can protect the place from actually exploding.